I love a good rom-com. As I approach the twilight years of my late 30s, there's nothing more comforting on a cold, lonely night than a big, thick, hard rom-com to fill that hole in my heart. What? 1990's Pretty Woman stars Julia Roberts as Vivian, a sex worker struggling to survive in LA. One day she's hired as an escort by a client, Edward, played by Richard Gere, who asks to keep her on for the whole week. She can't pass up the money, so she takes the job, but of course it just so happens that he is the greatest client any sex worker has ever had, and she falls in love with him. I mean, he doesn't even try to sleep with her, she just can't help herself. She just has to jump on that D. He gives her the confidence and the money to leave sex work because she could be so much more than this. Vivian has always dreamed of being rescued by a knight in shining armor, and like that knight, Edward turns up with a grand gesture to confess his love and save her from not being rich.
So what happened after he climbed up the tower and rescued her?
She rescues him right back.
30 years on, Pretty Woman is often considered pretty problematic. The perfect client rescues the sex worker narrative? Come on. But on the other hand, anti-sex work prohibitionists actually hated the film because Vivian is not enough of a victim, and she's not punished for doing sex work. Instead, you've got half of the audience going, I wish I was living in poverty working the streets of LA so I could get railed by Richard Gere. So we got the pro-Pretty Womaners, and we got the antis. But for some actual sex workers, there's an ambivalence towards the film. Yeah, it doesn't represent the work properly, but how could any single film do that anyway? Yeah, it's not realistic, but what rom-com is? But as a result of the success of Pretty Woman and a shift in the way the public saw sex workers, prohibitionists pushed back. That Hollywood portrayal was part of what let the prohibitionists know that they were losing and that they had to change their tactic. Because the whole tactic of all whores are criminals basically wasn't working anymore. People weren't buying it. Opposition to sex work had to be rebranded. So nowadays when sex workers face institutional oppression with arrests and deportations and abuse from the police, it's framed as them actually being rescued. So in this era of the rescue narrative, Pretty Woman's own rescue narrative is becoming increasingly uncomfortable to watch, even on the coldest and loneliest of nights. You know what? It's pretty lonely being a YouTuber. Maybe I could book someone. Hiya. Hey there. Do you wanna watch me complain about a movie for YouTube? Good Luck to You, Leah Grande, a 2022 film about a woman who meets up with a young male sex worker, is very aware of the problematic media portrayals of the trade. It's aware of the issues regarding safety, legality, the ethics. This film is feminist. It cares about sex workers' rights. It's not going to repeat the mistakes of the past. What could possibly go wrong? Nancy Stokes is a 60-something widow who has never had an orgasm. Her husband was a terrible lay. She's never even tried oral sex. But she wants to. Oh boy, does she want to. But despite being DTF, she's not interested in hooking up with a man her own age. She'd much rather writhe under the resplendent musculature of a 20-something bisexual gym rat. So she purchases the services of a young sex worker who goes by the name Leo Grande. Set almost entirely in one hotel room, the film explores the relationship between these two characters while Nanny McPhee explores her own body. It's an awakening, a story of blossoming, coming of age in her 60s. Nancy just wants to get fucked. But she's a little worried that Leo might have been pressured into sex work or be a sex trafficking victim or maybe even an orphan. Nancy's surprisingly woke to this line of work because, now, hopefully I'll get this right, she used to teach religious education to 12-year-olds in secondary school where she would assign them to write essays on whether or not sex work should be legalized.
What did they say?
The legalisation of sex work would ultimately provide protection for sex workers and help eradicate trafficking and abuse.
Do RE teachers assign 12-year-olds homework about sex work? Is that a thing now? Is that why Gen Z goes hard? Or did the scripts just go through so many rewrites they forgot what her job was? Because apparently she also used to tell 12-year-old girls that they need to wear longer skirts because the pedo male teachers couldn't resist them. The poor sods.
Some of those male teachers were like lambs to the slaughter, poor souls.
Let's put a video essay-sized pin in that. How am I doing? Yeah, so good. Liked and subscribed. Your Patreon is so big and hot. Thank you. So Leo services the shit out of Nancy over multiple sessions. Apparently Leo is really great at giving head, despite the fact that Nancy says she nearly fell asleep during it. And they've become quite close through lengthy conversations about family and sexuality, until one day Nancy has decided they should become friends IRL. She says she's done some amateur sleuthing and found out Leo's real name.
I know who you are. I found out who you are in real life. I mean, your real name. I found out your real name. And I was ready to tell you who I am. I thought we could maybe continue outside of here.
It doesn't really make sense how she found his real name. He's not an amateur. He knows how to keep his private shit private. But whatever. Like I said, rom-coms aren't meant to be realistic. No, wait. This isn't a rom-com.
This isn't a rom-com.
Sorry, I got confused for a second there. Nancy has decided that since Leo does such a good service for women like her, that he should be proud of his work and should be out about it, should tell his mum and his brother. In fact, Nancy wants to talk to his mum herself and tell her that she should be proud of Leo. And Leo is really upset because Professor Trelawney is acting like a stalker and breaking all of his boundaries.
Okay, Connor.
Don't you call me that. I have boundaries. I've asked you to respect them. You haven't, so I'll be going now. Please don't attempt to book me again.
He tries to walk out on her, but he's lost his phone. So he comes back and in the emotional upset of it all, ends up crying and giving a confession about his past and his mum.
She disowned me. She left me to fend for myself. I was 15.
He kisses her on the cheek and says he'll give her a refund and then leaves. Phew, that was very upsetting. Glad it's all over. Just kidding, he gets over it immediately. She books him again and he comes back, presumably to do damage control so this woman doesn't blackmail him or something. She says she's already recommended him to her friends, so he'll get some new clients out of it, because that sounds like a perfectly safe and not at all unnerving thing for the woman who cyberstalked you to do. And then in a grand gesture, she tells a former student of hers that she's paying to sleep with him and that's his job.
He's an absolute marvel with his tongue.
Which somehow proves that actually, she's become a better person now, because she used to be a prude and used to be weird about sex work, and now she's so cool and open about it. And then she just takes him upstairs and fucks him because she's earned it with her grand gesture, and he's completely happy with that. It's like that moment in Notting Hill when... No, wait, sorry, it's not like that. It can't be like that, because this is not a rom-com, it's just a respectful film about a sex worker and a client. It can't be a rom-com.
This isn't a rom-com.
It can't be a rom-com. At the end of the session, after she's had an orgasm for the first time in her life, she realizes that she doesn't need him anymore and lets him go. She's had her adventure and come out of it a better person, and even Leo smiles just walking down the street because this was such a great experience. Okay, so obviously this is a little disturbing. It reminds me of another film, something similar. What was it called? Oh yeah, the horror movie Cam. Cam was written by a former sex worker and portrays the story of Alice, an ambitious cam girl whose account gets supernaturally hacked. She's locked out, but somehow her shows are still continuing live without her input.
Here, I'll tip her. Orange?
All of the horror in this film comes from Alice's boundaries being violated. She loses control of her online image. A creepy fan moves to her town and is stalking her because he wants to date her. Her shows are recorded and circulated online without her consent. Her job is outed to her mom. Cam portrays the anxieties of a sex worker. Being outed, having your privacy invaded can be really terrifying. That is horror. But for good luck to you, Leo Grande, a film written from the perspective of the client, this horror is just a silly mistake, easily fixable, just in time for the heroine to get her sexy reward. Because Leo Grande isn't a horror, but unlike Pretty Woman, it isn't a rom-com either, right? Pretty Woman fits the formula of a rom-com. There's a meet cute where Edward is lost and asks Vivian for directions only to discover, OMG, she's a sex worker. So this gives us our unique troublesome situation in which our heroine is employed by the hero as an escort. Can they ever really be together? We have our relationship in jeopardy moment when Edward can only see a future for them as client and escort, so Vivian leaves him to move on with her life. And finally we have the grand gesture in which Edward pulls up to her apartment in a limo and faces his fear of heights by climbing up the fire escape to her. Leo Grande is totally different. The creators have repeatedly said it's not a rom-com.
This isn't a rom-com.
I mean, I guess we could see Nancy hiring Leo as a meet cute, and like with Pretty Woman, their client-worker dynamic is their unique troublesome situation, and we have the relationship in jeopardy moment when Nancy reveals she cyberstalked him and found out his real name. And I guess in a sense we have the grand gesture moment when she outs their relationship to a former student to face her fears. Oh fuck, it is a rom-com. Writer Katie Brand is definitely familiar with the genre. There are references to The Graduate,
Mrs. Robinson,
and When Harry Met Sally, which you can really see the influence of with the multiple long meetings, the fake orgasms.
It's empirically sexy.
Empirically, you are attractive.
You can see Dirty Dancing, the sheltered girl and a sexy, worldly, disenfranchised boy who introduces our heroine to unbeknownst pleasures. The age difference rom-com where they don't end up together has been done before too. I bet Maud didn't fall asleep when Harold ate her out. No matter how much the creators claim this isn't a rom-com, Leo Grande still hits those rom-com beats. It still creates the fantasy. Leo's line of work here is just a cute rom-com gimmick. Sometimes you meet a guy who's fallen through a crack in time, sometimes you meet a girl who's famous, and sometimes your boy has sex for money. Leo tells Nancy he's here to create a fantasy for her.
I'm whatever you want me to be.
But it's not just for her. It's for us, for the audience. In Cam, we see Alice creating the fantasy for her clients. We see her planning, shopping, setting up her workspace. There's a clear difference between her work mode and her private life.
I get you in pajamas and bratty and bored and biting your nails, but on that show you're a different person. You're confident.
We see her sex worker friends and how they talk about clients when no one's listening. We also see the financial stability sex work has afforded her. Unlike Leo, she's not in this because giving people orgasms turns her on. When she's smiling after work, it's not because she loves her clients so damn much, it's because she just ordered a $4,000 sofa. When the creepy client moves to her town, she gets angry at him and cuts contact. She only talks to him again when she thinks he can help her get her account back, and even then, she's playing him and she brings a taser. It turns out he knew the whole time that her account had been hacked, and he's been talking to the fake Alice because she gives him more than the real Alice ever did. There's an absolutely chilling scene in which the real Alice, exhausted and unglamorous, falls asleep in the creep's room, and he sneaks off into the bathroom to video chat with the fake Alice. Finally, after all this time, the real Alice is here with him, but he prefers the glamorous, always cheerful fake Alice. Cam tells us that clients might think they want to get to know the real you, the person behind the worker, but what they really want is the fantasy that someone like the work persona could exist 24/7, love them 24/7, the fantasy that they're the one exceptional client who will have their adoration reciprocated and get the service for free. Contrast that with Leo Grande. When Leo gets upset, he seems to the audience to break the facade, to be his genuine self. But he only gets upset in a way that doesn't destroy Nancy's fantasy, or our fantasy. It plays right into it. Instead of cutting her off for the online stalking, Leo rewards her by sharing details more private than anything he's told her before. Why would he do that? Can you imagine Alice going after her stalker in the shop and opening up about her mum? But Nancy is the perfect client. She's the exceptional client. So wonderful that she can break all of Leo's boundaries and he will still desire her. The film tells us Leo is attracted to all of his clients.
What if you don't fancy the person? I mean, you can't force yourself, surely, if you don't.
There's always something to fancy.
Giving them pleasure turns him on. He's not just providing a service for Nancy, he's also genuinely into it. It's heavily implied that Leo is bisexual, but we only get a nice sanitized insight into that. He got kicked out as a teenager for having an orgy with his friends. It was probably a bisexual orgy, right?
She and a neighbour are walking in on me and my friends, and we're all bodies wrapped up together, a bit of everything going on. Look, she tried to hide her repulsion, but I could just feel it vibrating through the walls. She said she was glad I was going and that she would never speak my name again.
I don't think kids get thrown out for being straight, but it's left ambiguous in the film. When he discusses having male clients, there's no sex. He just dresses up in silly costumes for them. Don't worry, ladies, your boy isn't doing the butt sex. Good Luck to You, Leo Grande is the perfect fantasy, but only for the client.
You're the only adventure I've ever had.
You just wanted something exotic. A broken little whore.
One sex worker had this to say about the film. It's portrayed as a romantic thing where Nancy meets this sex worker and they help her feel alive again. That made me laugh because it's coming from such a client-heavy perspective. From the sex worker's perspective, you're working. It's like clocking in for a shift. For us, it's not this intimate, wonderful experience. You just sit and listen to the client. Leo's behind the scenes is not off-putting to Nancy because, unlike Alice, He's never shown to be a boring, tired, unsexy, real human being. His background is still a fantasy. It's a sexy backstory, getting kicked out for having an orgy, but without any explicit homophobia to spoil the mood. He does the job not because he has bills to pay, but because he just loves pleasuring people.
And one thing I love, Nancy, is just to watch someone's face when they feel pleasure.
Would you like it?
Everything that defines him revolves around his sexuality, which is generous and hedonistic. And Nancy is shown to have rescued him, but this isn't the 90s rescue fantasy of marrying the sex worker and getting them out of the trade. It's the 2020s woke fantasy. Rescuing Leo means helping him realize his job is nothing to be ashamed of. Nancy empowers Leo. It's only because of her that he tells his brother about his job. It's not quite as dissimilar to Pretty Woman as you'd hoped. Pretty Woman also rests on the fantasy that the exceptional client will have just as big of an impact on the worker's life as the worker had on theirs.
She rescues him right back.
And that's how all this posturing about sex workers' rights is revealed to be just another part of the client's fantasy. The updated fantasy where what makes the client exceptional in the 21st century is that they're actually really, really cool about sex work. This is also how all of the axes of oppression in Leo Grande are flattened into a kind of simplistic liberal slut-shaming. Nancy wasn't weirded out by sex work because of stigma, it was because she didn't understand how pleasurable it was, how good it could be for her.
Pleasure is a wonderful thing.
She didn't know how sexy 20-something-year-old men with big dicks would find her attractive, and now she does. She can finally grow into the best version of herself. When she was calling her 12-year-old students sluts and telling them they needed to wear longer skirts, she wasn't being a pedo apologist, she just didn't understand sexual empowerment. And now that she's experienced it, she understands she messed up.
I owe you an apology for calling you a slut. I thought I was doing the right thing at the time, but now...
Basically what this feminist film is trying to tell us is that Nancy just needed a good fuck, and now she can stop being so damn frigid. But even if the politics around sex work in this film are performative, at least they're good. This film has a very progressive outlook on sex work. Nancy even suggests sex workers could be available through the local council.
Actually, you're right, Leo, this should be a public service.
Just think how civilized it could be. If it was just available to all and there's no shame attached, there's no judgment.
Leo thinks sex work should be legal and regulated, which actually sounds pretty awesome. Nope, get out of the way. What? No, just think of this as me. I'm domming you right now. This is domming. Are you a sub? I could be. Perfect. Now, this whole Leo Grande thing is a lot more fucked up than it sounds. There are 3 legal models for sex work. There's criminalization, legalization, and decriminalization. Out of these models, criminalization is the most dangerous for sex workers, either banning the whole sex trade or just parts of it. It might be illegal to do sex work altogether, or the work is legal but paying for it is not. The thing about criminalization is that it never actually manages to prevent or even decrease sex work. It just pushes it underground. The same way that outlawing abortion never prevents abortion, it just makes it harder for people to stay safe. For example, under the UK's partial criminalisation, sex workers are only allowed to work on their own, individually. That's meant to prevent exploitation. The idea is that the work is fine, but they don't want you to be exploited by a pimp. So, sounds good, right? But in practice, what this legislation means is that workers are not allowed to work in the same apartment together or work in groups on the street. Even if there is no pimp, they can be charged with exploiting one another. In the real world, working in groups can be one of the most important measures for sex workers to keep each other safe. Safety in numbers, right? When sex workers are forced to work alone, that can put them in incredible danger. In the UK, 152 sex workers were murdered between 1990 and 2015. In 2017, a 70-year-old woman, apparently working as a cleaner in a brothel, called an ambulance when a client collapsed. She performed CPR on him until the paramedics arrived, and as a result of having tried to save this guy's life, she was convicted of managing a brothel. No good deed, right? Even if she was actually running a brothel, are the streets now safer that the elderly woman who tries to save lives has been caught and punished? If you can be arrested for trying to help someone or asking the police to save you from a violent client, for example, then you just aren't going to ask for help, and people will be hurt. People will die. Now, legalization and decriminalization might sound similar, but they're not. Legalization allows sex work, but the industry is regulated by the government and might, for example, require a license. Decriminalization, on the other hand, removes or repeals the laws which make sex work illegal, all that gotcha stuff the cops use to screw over sex workers, but it doesn't implement any government regulation. This can massively improve the safety of sex workers. They don't have to be scared of the police in the same way, and it also reduces violence from clients because sex workers can report the clients without being arrested themselves. Their health improves because they're not scared of disclosing their profession to their doctors, and they can also organize health workshops and other services for fellow sex workers. In countries that have implemented decriminalization, condom use with clients is up and drug use for sex workers is down. Legalization, on the other hand, comes with regulation, so this is what Leo wants.
Just think how civilized it could be. It's all regulated and safe for you, for me.
Regulation sounds good in theory. It sounds like you have the opportunity to put in place laws which would help keep the workers safe, but in reality, regulations tend to come at a significant cost to the workers. Leo Grande screenwriter Katie Brand has spoken about how she spends a lot of time in Germany where the work is totally legal, so regulated. In Germany, sex workers have to register with the government and get a special business permit. This is somehow meant to prevent exploitation, but sex workers say the law has actually made them more vulnerable. Because of the stigma associated with the trade, most sex workers don't want it on record for privacy reasons or future work prospects. Others can't register because they don't have an address or a residency permit. Because of these reasons, it's estimated that 90% of sex workers in Germany are unregistered. That means that regulation hasn't solved anything, it's just made the unregistered work illegal. So the vast majority of sex workers can now be prosecuted for their work because they're not registered. So it's generally considered that decriminalization is what's best for the workers, and that's supported by organizations such as the Global Network of Sex Work Projects, Amnesty International, the World Health Organization. In 2003, New Zealand implemented complete decriminalization. Opponents to this were worried that there would be an explosion of brothels and human trafficking, but that hasn't been the case at all. Workers are now able to report violence without fear of arrests. Attacks clear up more quickly. Workers can leave the industry if they want to, as convictions are cleared from their records. And there's been no increase in the number of sex workers. Most sex workers find it easier to refuse clients, and the police's attitudes towards them has changed for the better. Decriminalization hasn't solved all problems, but it's definitely improved things better than criminalization or legalization ever has. So in good luck to you, Leo Grande, it seems a little weird to put these words in Leo's mouth, that he should be interested in regulating sex work, when that's not what the actual industry organizations and unions are advocating for. And Leo is portrayed as being very smart, very knowledgeable about the industry and safety. Wouldn't he know the difference? And then Nancy wants the government to provide sex workers?
This should be a public service.
You know who else fantasizes about the government providing them with a sex worker? Incels. That's right, Professor Trelawney is a fucking incel, and good luck to you, Leo Grande. It's fucking incel propaganda. Actually, in 2015, when Amnesty International was voting to change its policy regarding sex work to advocate for decriminalization, Emma Thompson, along with other celebrities such as Lena Dunham and Meryl Streep, signed a petition opposing it. So 7 years ago, Thompson was against decriminalization, and with Leo Grande, she did actually have input in the script apparently, and the film appears very much to be for legalization, so regulation. Often the argument against decriminalization involves victims of human trafficking, but it's important not to conflate consensual sex work and trafficking. Sex workers are obviously the people who know the industry best, and are in a unique position to recognize a victim of trafficking. If sex work is totally decriminalized, that puts them in a position to easily report suspected trafficking without having to worry about losing their livelihood or violence from the police. Laws meant to prevent human trafficking, such as foster sesta in the US, usually don't help trafficking victims at all and just make it more dangerous for trafficking victims and for sex workers. Foster sesta shut down websites for advertising sex work services because that would prevent any human trafficking from happening through those websites. But in reality, bans like that only push trafficking victims deeper underground. and it makes them more invisible. And legal experts have said foster sester actually made it harder for police to find trafficked people. It also endangers sex workers because they've lost the option for independent advertising. So many are now forced onto the streets or have to use exploitative third parties. Besides that, websites used to screen clients or share information about dangerous clients were also shut down. So not only has foster sester done nothing to prevent human trafficking, it's actually made things worse. In fact, foster sester is so broad and all-encompassing that even internet services that aren't catering to sex workers rushed to change their rules. For example, even if you're just using Skype to, have a little bit of cyber sex with your spouse, show them a little bit of that nib. Now, that makes Microsoft liable for enabling human trafficking. So Microsoft has introduced new rules which give them the right to look through your communications and ban you. Whoops, it's 2022 and all our personal correspondence belongs to corporations. Just makes you want to go and buy a pen and paper, doesn't it? Emma Thompson actually worked on an anti-sex trafficking art project in 2008. She proposed to NBC News that one way to prevent trafficking was for clients to demand to see sex workers' passports, which is so terrifyingly misguided, but I suppose I can see how this perspective on the industry evolved into her opinion today. A sex worker is safer when their boundary is broken by the client. The client knows best, I guess. In a recent interview promoting Leo Grande, Emma Thompson actually said she now supports decriminalization, but goes on to explain that this includes regulation. Decriminalization would mean there are regulations and there are protective measures in place so everyone can relax. So she's mixed up decriminalization with legalization. She's still advocating for legalization over decriminalization, which is exactly what we get in the film. And clearly she's well-intentioned, right? But like the average person, she doesn't really understand sex work, except she's a celebrity, so she has a massive platform to spread her misinformed opinions. Katie Brand said that Good Luck to You, Leo Grande is not meant to represent any particular argument in regards to sex work, which is kind of hard to believe when regulation is explicitly addressed as an ideal by the sex worker in the film. But at the end of the day, this is meant to be a fantasy. It's a fantasy for the client, it's a fantasy for the viewer, for the writer. If regulation makes Katie Brand and Emma Thompson feel good about sex work, then who actually cares about the reality of it? This film is not about how can Leo's services as a sex worker assist Nancy. It's about how can Leo, his whole person, serve Nancy. It breaks the boundaries of worker and client and becomes how can the worker's pain inspire and elevate the client. It is actually possible to write a non-creepy story just from the client's perspective. There's an episode of Netflix's Special in which the main character, who is a virgin, decides to hire a sex worker for his first time. He has a really positive experience. It's good. It's happy. And to top it off, he doesn't fall in love with the guy. He doesn't creep on him. He doesn't try to find his identity. He pays for the services are rendered, and he moves on with his life. It's still an intimate experience. The main character is hiding his disability from all of his friends, but the sex worker recognizes he has cerebral palsy because he's had other clients with CP. It's a really nice, earnest moment without the sex worker having to also open up and share all of his personal trauma and insecurities. He's just doing his job. It's such a healthy representation, it's kind of mind-blowing. It's based on the writer/star's real experience with hiring sex workers. He said in interviews he doesn't think sex work is a big deal. It's not revolutionary, it's just a thing that exists. And the show really reflects that attitude. I think the way Leo Grande portrays an older woman's sexuality, that it lets her be messy and it lets her be horny, is all actually really cool. And I was genuinely excited to see this film, but it's a shame to see all of that at the expense of Leo's character. Maybe this film was just trying to do too many things at once, but for sure, they made a mistake trying to portray sex workers in a respectful light while attempting to do a rom-com with a client at the same time. It's a real shame because the first half of this film is lovely. The characters are great, the performances are great. What was almost a great character study just descends into wacky rom-com antics. And who knows, maybe something went wrong in production. This script was chosen for COVID reasons, and it's very easy to see why. Most of it's just two characters in a room, so maybe it was rushed and there wasn't enough time to polish the story. Maybe that's why it ends up being this embarrassingly earnest fantasy by a screenwriter who Loves visiting Germany. I don't want to overstate the importance of representation, especially in some obscure Hulu film most people will never even see. The real work, the real change happens outside of television screens. It's sex workers and allies working long days and nights to change legislation and provide support services for sex workers. But a rom-com can make a difference to some people, and especially if your film is going to do that educational thing where the laughter stops, so you can have long stretches of dialogue explaining the realities of the industry to the audience. I do think you have a responsibility to, at the very least, do a little research before you start preaching. Wow, that was really great. Can I tell you something? Yeah, anything. What's up? I think I might be falling in love with you. Well, you know what, Verily? I think I might be falling in... Oh, is that the time? I'm sorry, our session's come to an end, but we'll do this again. You book me again and we're gonna have a good time. All right, bye. Thank you for watching this very special episode of Verily Bitchy. Please consider gently tapping the like button and the subscribe button. And the little bell too. Thank you so much to all my patrons. This video is not getting monetized, so thank you so much for your support. And a special thanks to Angela, Eric Parkinson, Corwin Found, Fluffy Bunny Boo, Gamer Guy J, Gwenda Euphoria, Helena Varvarusis, Joe Liss, Juliana Baca, Machina Ex Domina, Metavore, Mia Nilo, Metheta, Non-Anonymouse, Norberto Ochoa, Selenia Latovara, Siobhan, Stephen Wallace, Tasha Heim, Wix, Abigail Eckstein, Erin, Alice Lovell, Elena Vera, Amelia D, Anya Stephen, Anna S, Apathetic Gaiety, Arden, Artemix, Avery, Avriotta, B, Ben Hengst, Bestlaff, Beth, Byroni, Break Every Yoke, Bump Girl, Kane Friedman, Katrina Lexi, Charis Edwards, Chloe Strange, Claire, Comfort and Adam, Connor Thompson, Daria, Deanna McMillan, Devon As Usual, Dorothy, Dropout Ninja, Eden Ladley, Erie Enby, Ellie Cannard, Elsie Astro, Emery James Fairgrieve, Eve Griffith, Evergarden Wall, Fancy Angles, Fawn, Felixer of Life, Gabriella Day, Gavin Salmon, Gerald Brenter, Ghosts and You Might Die, Ginger, Grace Robertson, Grisela Farben, Guillermo Perez, Hackneyed Edits, Jackie Queen of Thieves, Jem Kwasowski, Jennifer Fronister, Jessage, Gillian D, Joyt, Joe McManus, Jules Inkwell, Julio Mendez, Julius Sawin, Juniper Lopez, Cafe Mewtwo, Kale, Kate and Jess, Katarina Glomb, Katie B, Katie Bollinger, Kata, Katya, Kaitzera, Kailani Garcia, Kisa, Kyle Denley, Lee Hedstrom, Lindsay Mercer, Liron Ehrensberger, Lisa Spitalovitz, Lumpy Llama, Malva, Murray Bass, Marla, Math Class Warfare, McKenning Wood, Mike Bucket, Mizaka de Mizan, Mugsy, Moshe Gordon Radian, Mrunmai Salil, Mirren McGlynn, Neve, Nico, Nick Snary, Nina, Noe, Nullbuild, Os Donnelly, Ossian Matthew, Panny Lynn, Pseudo Pac-Man, Queer Aesthetic, Radical Planning, Rebecca Peacock, River Haddock, Rock the Shell, Sarah Buchelman, Sarah R, Shockstopia, Shaved-Headed By, Sean, She Algorithm, Simon Patience, Sithvich, Strawfox, Summertime Killer, Susie S, Sveeple the Transboy Valkyrie, Tia Quinn, The Children of Jack Hassett, Thomas Oshogun Halajan, Tia Till, Tina Gigya, Tom Harrison, Verlux, Vicious Panda, Vince Whitaker, Wandering Sock, Wards, Will O'Connor, Jonathan Zunga, and Yuli Themstead.